Delegate Lehman has represented District 21 since 2019. She serves on the Government, Labor, and Elections Committee and chairs its Local Government by County Agencies Subcommittee and sits on the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee. Delegate Lehman is a fierce advocate for renewable energy, electric vehicle incentives, eliminating single-use plastics, and a bill that I've worked on with Delegate Lehman in the past, and one that I think we're going to hear a little bit about today, is protecting Marylanders from flooding, protecting our waterways, our wetlands, our communities from the impact of flooding. And so, Delegate Lehman, it's a pleasure to introduce you today, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off on, I believe, what is three bills that you'll be talking about, maybe four. So we'll buckle up, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Can you hear and see me okay?
I sure can, yeah.
Okay, great. Good. I'm doing this from my car. I just left a protest on Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring and didn't have time to make it home, so I'm winging it here from my car. But want to thank my wonderful Chief of Staff, Mary Jane, for making up these great slides. So we did substitute at the last minute one bill for another one. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the Patuxent Research Center bill that I want to give credit where it's due. Senator Rosa Pepp approached me about cross-filing this, and the idea came up because years and years and years ago, we're talking decades ago, Senator Rosa Pepp, who was then a state delegate along with the District 21 team back then, put in a bill to protect the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which is also in our district. It's about 6,500, 7,000 acres of, of farmland in northern Prince George's County. And President Reagan, in a very high-profile way, maybe others beside him, but he made a big splash and a big to-do about the fact that that Beltsville Agricultural Research Center being in suburban Washington didn't make sense. This was the kind of research and the work that should have been done in other parts of the country, in the heartland and elsewhere. And he proposed closing it and selling it off. And so I think that's what prompted the legislation way back when to protect bark. And Senator Rosa Pepp got to talking to a former colleague, Delegate Tim Maloney, and said, do you think we should try to do something similar to protect the Patuxent Research Center? And on the site of the Patuxent Research Center is also the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge. It's 13,000 acres in Prince George's County. And again, I have to say, and this actually straddles the line between state districts 23 and 21, massive area of undeveloped property, mostly wooded, but also wetlands, meadows, ponds. And there are a few buildings where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a visitor center, and of course it does research. And given the Trump administration's, let's face it, I would call it disdain for a lot of federal agencies and the importance of scientific research, and they've already made noise about closing bark again. And so we're putting in this bill to protect the Patuxent Research Center, and the way we would do that is through zoning. So it's pretty straightforward. It says that the Prince George's County Council, when it sits as the district council, it's the same group of lawmakers, only when they decide land use cases, they're called the district council. And it would say they cannot do any kind of enron. First of all, it says that the property would be zoned, agricultural, but it also could be zoned. We could debate that and get feedback, like forest or open space, because it's really not agricultural per se, but it's borrowing that language from all those years ago when of the General Assembly protected bark. So it says if the federal government, tries to sell or lease that land, that the zoning has to remain. And then it ties the hands of the district council, the county council sitting as the district council, saying it cannot try any end run around the zoning with like text amendments and that kind of thing. And not that we believe the current council would do that, but you just don't know what the future holds. So I think that's pretty powerful. The General Assembly was successful in doing that all those years ago with Bark. I don't see any reason why we will not succeed with this bill to protect the Patuxent Research Center. And that bill it is in drafting. It's not a pre-file, but it's in drafting, and it will go to the Environment and Transportation Committee. So I want to stop and see if anybody has questions about it.
No questions have come through just yet, but we can move to your next bill and see if any do.
Absolutely. Okay, so next is flood risk disclosure, and I want to caution. So this first slide is accurate. Well, okay, it says, okay, so it looks like that. I'm confused because I saw the early slides that got submitted, and I know that they all said environment and transportation, and I wasn't sure if that was a reference to my committee, now my previous committee, or the committee where we thought these bills were going. And it's getting a little confusing. I think a lot of you know, because this seventh standing committee has been added, but not only that, but a lot of the jurisdictional issues have moved in between committees. So where a year ago, well, the 2025 session, I should say, this flood risk disclosure bill would have come to the Environment and Transportation Committee. Well, because housing is now in economic matters, this bill will go to economic matters. We suspected that. It is a pre-file. I've already looked at it. It is indeed going to ECM. And so what it will do, the second slide is a little confusing because it inadvertently mixes this flood risk disclosure bill with a bill that comes after it, which is Stream Smart. But essentially, this flood risk disclosure bill requires sellers of real property to fill out a worksheet that details whether the property they are selling has ever flooded in the past, whether it is in a floodplain, and what its risk of is for flooding in the future. I happened to be at a conference in Pennsylvania, and I picked up a brochure, and it was talking about a Pennsylvania flood risk disclosure law that was under consideration in the Pennsylvania legislature. And it got me wondering, I wonder if Maryland has this law. I would think we do, because this brochure said that 30 states have this law already. And I was thinking, surely Maryland has this law. Well, guess what? We don't. And then I reached out to the realtors, and they said, we actually have been wanting this for a long time because it protects sellers and buyers. And with increased flooding, with increase in catastrophic storms and the frequency and the intensity, and in flooding, think Ellicott City, there was 800-year floods in a 3-year period. People need to know this. If they are going to look at buying property, they need to know clearly what the flood risk is, whether the property has flooded ever in the past, and what the potential is for flooding in the future. So again, this bill is fairly straightforward. 30 states have it. I never take anything for granted, but we're going to work it hard, but it helps to have the realtors on board. And I feel good about it. It will be in economic matters. So any questions about that?
We don't have any coming in through right now. We do have one about the Patuxent, which why don't we go through and get through your other two bills, and then we'll jump back
Sure.
to all this.
Yeah. Okay, so on my next bill, I do have help. I hope Denise Kainer is here. And Denise, if you are here, I'm going to give a very brief intro of what gave sort of rise to this. Matt referenced this in passing when he introduced me. I work with Matt and some other river keepers several years ago on a bill that took the concept of an existing law, which is called Coast Smart, and requires siting and design criteria for just government buildings and infrastructure that are built in areas at risk of coastal flooding. And the idea of these river keepers, and I still think it's a great idea, is that this should extend to private development, because that law currently only applies to state investments in buildings or in roadways and other infrastructure. And so we tried that bill. It never got out of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I tried it twice, including one time cross filing it with then Senator Sarah Elfreth, and she didn't get any traction in the Senate either. So it's been a couple of years since we've revisited this issue. And, again, with all of the challenges with catastrophic storms and flooding, I had started talking to DNR and MDE about the concept of expanding this law to properties at risk of riverine flooding, because that's a significant challenge in Maryland. Again, when you think of, the Ellicott City flood, that was riverine flooding. And I have the Patuxent River that passes right through the heart of my district in Laurel. And so that's a real concern. So Denise worked with me to come up with
Yeah.
language. And Denise, if you could summarize what the bill does.
Yeah. So essentially as Delegate Lehman indicated, what the bill does is put in sort of motion the same kinds of protections that exist under the Coast Smart program for state-funded infrastructure projects, buildings or roads or whatever, that are located in riverine areas. So to me, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It says, gee, those areas also are prone to inundation associated with high rainfall events and historically high rainfall events that are again associated with climate change. So, what the bill essentially requires is that for state-funded projects, they would have to be developed by the Coast Smart Council, citing and design criteria, just like they did for the coastal areas, but for riverine areas. And so we would begin the process in the state of making sure that riverine areas, if there were any state or local government projects that relied upon state funds, that there would be protections to ensure that those projects wouldn't be inundated by, and the legislation includes by a 500-year flood event. So that's essentially what it does, and it has timelines. So there's a little bit of phase in period for this to be effective, because the Coast Smart Council will have to develop the siting and design criteria for these riverine areas. But the legislation does say that it should be tied to preventing inundation associated with a 500-year flood event.
And Denise, did you want to describe briefly, unless you are not clear on the concerns from DNR and MDE? They are not opposed to this at all. They tell us that they have been thinking about an
Right.
expansion to riverine flooding, but they raise some sort of technical questions about maps and the status of maps and when they might be updated.
Right. So the way the legislation is crafted, it basically puts on the Coast Smart Council the obligation to describe the data, the models, and the methods and maps that need to be used. And that's why there needs to be a little bit of time, to make sure that whatever needs to be done by the Coast Smart Council to put those tools in place, can be done and can be implemented. I mean, when we talked with the Maryland Department of the Environment in particular, the fellow that was the head of this program for a long time in the sort of the National Floodplain Management Program, essentially said that the Coast Smart Council has talked among itself for years now about expanding into riverine areas. And I think that this legislation will effectively give the mandate that they have to stop just talking about it, and they need to actually move forward and
Right.
put these siting and design criteria in place.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And so they're going to be supportive, but I think we're going to have to compromise on the timeline based on their concerns about updated mapping
Right.
and as Denise said, the Coast Smart Council having up-to-date information and tools that it needs to design a unique checklist of siting and design criteria that is going to be probably not dramatically different, but somewhat different than a coastal checklist would be.
Right. And I'd like to you mentioned too that Maryland wouldn't be the first state that has begun to go in this direction. Vermont, New Jersey, and of course North Carolina with that terrible riverine flooding that happened in 2024 that killed 100 people and destroyed communities. They're all moving in that same direction to put these standards in place, not just in coastal areas, but in riverine areas as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your help with this, Denise. Any questions, Matt?
No, we don't have any questions, so we're going to keep rolling through your next one, which I'm excited to hear about, the ban on exotic pet ownership by private citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit different for me, but I had approached the Humane Society years ago about this idea of banning the ownership of exotic pets. And the reason was, I don't know if any of you on this, in this summit remember, but a few years back, somebody in southern Prince George's County who owns several zebras had them escape from his property, and they were on the run for several days. And I think there were at least two, but there might have been three of them. And, you wouldn't think a zebra could be, missing for long because obviously they kind of stand out with their stripes, but they were, on the lam for a few days. And sadly, it had a tragic ending because either two of them died or all of them died. Because they never were captured and they didn't make it back safely. At least one or two of them, got caught up on fences, and it was just horrifying. But the first thing I said when I read this news story, which is I imagine what a lot of people said, is why does a private citizen even own zebras? Like, why? What rationale is there for it? Why is it even allowed? Well, it's allowed because it's not allowed. Our state, law does not prohibit it. It does prohibit ownership of certain other kinds of exotic pets. But when I first approached the Humane Society, they said, "Yeah, we've looked at that. The timing is not quite right. We have other priorities. We have to, we want it. We want to be strategic about it. But we agree with you." And so, from the time I initially approached them, I asked maybe one or two more times, and the timing wasn't right. Well, I guess Humane Society now goes by Humane World, and there is new leadership there. So I thought, you know what, maybe it's time to take this issue up again and just pitch it. And Stacy Volodin, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. She's wonderful. I've met with her a few times. And as soon as I approached her, she said, "We would love to partner with you on this." So this bill will actually go to the House Judiciary Committee. And why is that? It's because once we pass this ban, and I do not know if it'll pass the first year. I hope it will. I hope we'll make a good argument for it about safety issues and the appropriateness of people, owning wild animals, human safety, animal safety, escapes, all of those things. And we'll put up our best arguments and hope we get the job done. But it will go to judiciary because if you violate this once it takes effect, and it will also have to have, it will have to grandfather people that do own these animals. And it, of course, will allow for the continued ownership by conservation organizations and zoos and that kind of thing. But it will be a criminal penalty if you are found to own one of these animals. And because of the criminal penalty, it cannot be considered by the Environment and Transportation Committee. Yes, it's animal welfare, but the penalties are serious. And so because they're criminal, the Judiciary Committee has to be the committee of jurisdiction. But quickly, it does prohibit the private ownership of zebras, of kangaroos, of wallabies, and an animal I had never heard of, but they're called wallaroos, and they are a hybrid, and they're a cross between, I guess, wallabies and kangaroos, but they're a lot smaller. But to emphasize again, these are all wild animals. They are not they should not be pets, and they can be dangerous. I mean, I'm sure you all have read and heard about how powerful, kangaroos are. Their legs are extremely powerful. They can kick, they can stomp people to death. You see people make light of it. They punch almost like boxers. And someone told me a story of some guy in like Tennessee who owned a kangaroo and got really intoxicated and thought it was funny to get into a boxing match. Well, the kangaroo like pummeled this man. He didn't die, but he ended up very seriously injured. And so I would love your support on this. Again, it's a little bit unusual, but Maryland does have a long list of pet or I'm sorry, exotic animals that cannot be owned as pets. And so I'm grateful for interest and support on this bill.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that. What a range of legislation this year, Delegate. I really appreciate, as always, your ambition and desire to bring meaningful legislation from zebras to flooding. I see it in the future, a Riverine Smart committee or guidelines and principles because of your hard work. And so I just want to say on behalf of all the organizers today, thank you for presenting today and for bringing all this legislation forward in this General Assembly's legislative session coming up.